For In My Opinion today, we're looking at the fan-led review of football. Today the government is announcing major changes to the way the men's professional game is governed and run. They include setting up an independent regulator, stronger tests for ownership, and giving fans a voice in the running of their clubs. Niall Couper is the CEO of Fair Game. They're a campaign group made up of football clubs who are working to improve the governance of football. Morning, Niall.
Good morning, how are you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks. You've been calling for this for a long time. What have you made of the announcement today?
I mean, it's a welcome first step. It's good to have the independent regulator firmly on the radar. The issue, though, is the timetable, because it's not got a firm deadline of when it's actually going to come into place. So our fear is there could be more dithering, there could be more delays, and we believe that would devastate football where it is. 7 times governments have tried to introduce regulation into football over the years, and it's always ended up being a document that's grown dusty and stale underneath Parliament, and that's our fear. But on the surface of it, it looks very good, but we do need that firm timetable to make this actually become legislation. Otherwise, we're missing a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
It is interesting that the Premier League have been pretty open about the fact that they don't want an independent regulator. So this is significant, isn't it?
It's hugely significant. I mean, the reason why at the Premier League, I think it's important to differentiate between the Premier League and Premier League clubs, because they're not one entity. They will have slightly different views, individual clubs, on this. But when you look at it, what is there to fear from regulation here? When you look at what is regulated in our society at the moment, the banking sector, which is financially far, far bigger than football, has loads of regulation, and that's for the safety protections of consumers. What we're looking at is the safety protection of fans and of well-run community clubs, which is what we really need to look to. So there shouldn't really be anything to fear from a regulator at all. And that's what we want is just a bit more protection, a bit more security that hasn't been there for a very, very long time. And if you're a Bury fan or a Macclesfield fan or an AFC Wimbledon fan, the list is very, very long, Derby County right now, then with a regulator, the traumas and the troubles and strife that you've been through just wouldn't have happened. Same with the ESL. There wouldn't have been an ESL with a really good, strong regulator. And I think most football fans would agree with that. I mean, there was a recent poll of 11,000 Premier League fans that found 85% were in favour of a regulator. So I think, the Premier League really needs to kind of grow up and realise that the argument for an independent regulator is frankly over now.
Do you believe it's genuinely possible to get clubs to change their spending habits in order to become more sustainable?
I think the reality is that we can't have that conversation anymore. It just needs to happen, because there's been too many clubs put at risk for this. And when you talk about what's at risk, it's the history and traditions of football. It's the fan that goes down and watches his club and has done with his grandparents or whatever, the person who remembers being on his dad's or mum's shoulders when they were young. Those sort of traditions, the kind of memories that we've got, that's what's at risk. Football clubs really should be at the heart of communities, and that's what makes it different. That's what makes it so special. And I think that's what we really need to protect. And it is looking at reshaping culture. And, for Fair Game, we believe that the financial flows are the big problems here. And if you start looking at it and go, right, instead of giving parachute payments out, you started saying, well, let's give money to, well-run, hard-working community clubs throughout the pyramid. And that will change. That will make an incentive to actually be better run and to make sure that those clubs are there not just for tomorrow, but for generations to come. And that's a culture change. I won't deny that, but that's what we need to aim for. And Fair Game, we've been developing this thing called the Sustainability Index that does exactly that. And that's really where the debate needs to be. Let's start judging clubs on proper criteria and giving the money out to the ones that score highest on those criteria. It's a really simple idea and simple concept, but it'll be transformational.
Do you think that all clubs will be open to the idea of fans having more of an influence on how they're run?
I think that's going to vary club by club, and that's obviously going to be a different situation. I mean, I'm an AFC Wimbledon fan, so, obviously I've got one kind of experience, but, in Fair Game, there are a number of clubs that are owner-run. Most of them are owner-run, and that there's a nervousness there naturally, because you kind of think, how do you get the right fan on the board? How do you make sure it isn't tokenism? How do you make sure that there is that expertise? One of the things about the shadow board concept, which is largely not a bad concept, is making sure that the fans that are representative also have the skill sets necessary to run a football club. So if you are going to, as the fan review suggests, make sure you have the proper skills on the existing board, you also need to make sure that the proper skills exist on any shadow board and that fans have that skill set available to help and assist the club. It's about dual partnership between the supporters and the owners of the club to make sure that you can really develop and push that club on. So it's, there are different opinions, there are different views on that, but it's about making sure you have the right people involved. And I think that's the key, that's the bottom line. And that's what the fan review and the results of today's response really echo, and Fair Game supports that.
What do you think is missing from what you're reading today? Like, I noticed that there's nothing about the solidarity transfer levy, for example.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the big things I think that's missing. And the whole looking at financial redistribution really needs to be addressed. In the moment that the suggestion is that it lies with the Premier League and the EFL. And the Premier League largely is really a group now of 24 clubs. And I say 24 because it's the clubs that yo-yo between the Premier League and the Championship. And the EFL voting structure currently really is very, very heavily weighted towards the top end of the Championship. So having those two bodies looking at the whole football ecosystem kind of says, well, I don't really care too much about the lower half of the Championship, League One, League Two, the National League, National League North, South, and the women's game. And, there's so much more to football than just that small top clubs. But even then, there's issues to be addressed within the top of the Premier League as well. So I think that financial redistribution really needs to be addressed. We've done loads of modelling at Fair Game. We've been speaking to financial experts in football, many people that support us, and we've developed our own really strong models that have been kind of tested and run through numerous different models and academics. And there is a real need to change. We all know how much the parachute payments distort the Championship, and that needs to be addressed. And that's an upsetting missing factor in the response today. But I mean, largely, there's a lot of good stuff in there.
We're going to be speaking to the Technology Minister, Chris Philp, just after 8. Is there any one thing you would want to say to him about what you want to see going forward?
I think the number one thing is that timeline. Let's not have this kicked into the long grass. I want a date. At the moment, it says the summer, but the summer for me, can slip into October, November, then, with pressure could just disappear altogether. I don't want another dusty document sitting on the bottom of Parliament. I want real, proper change. So don't say the summer, say something like 10th of June. Give us an actual date, an actual proper fixed timeline that it is really going to happen. That's the big thing. That's what fans want. That's what the clubs of Fair Game want. We want real change. We're so close to it now. Let's not blow it.
Good to speak to you this morning. Thanks very much, Niall. That's Niall Couper, CEO of Fair Game.